Good morning, everyone. I'm Emma Alonso. I'm your moderator for the session, and I think we're live. Okay. Well, good morning to all of you, and thank you for joining us for this morning's panel. We're really excited to have today's discussion, Promoting Freedom Online, Tackling Online Disinformation, at today's World Press Freedom Day conference. My name is Emma Alonso. I'm the director of the Free Expression Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology, where we work on a wide range of law and policy issues to promote access to information and freedom of expression online. I'm also a member of the Freedom Online Coalition's advisory network, and I'm really delighted to be your moderator of this session. To give you a bit of background about the Freedom Online Coalition, the FOC, which organized today's session, is an intergovernmental coalition of 32 members established in 2011 at the inaugural Freedom Online Conference in The Hague, in the Netherlands. The FOC is committed to advancing internet freedom, including free expression, freedom of association and assembly, and privacy online in the member countries and across the globe. A key priority of the FOC is the shaping of global norms through joint action, in particular through developing joint statements and leveraging those statements' languages and key messages through bilateral engagements and through the coalition's diplomatic networks in a variety of multilateral fora. The FOC has issued joint statements on, among other things, internet censorship, network disruptions, digital inclusion, and the promotion and protection of human rights online in the context of cybersecurity. The latest joint statement of the FOC was launched in November 2020 and focuses on the spread of disinformation online, in which the coalition expresses deep concern about the growing scope and sophistication of disinformation and calls for measures to address this issue to be implemented by all stakeholders, including governments around the world, the private sector, civil society, research and educational institutions, the media, and individuals. In particular, the statement on the spread of disinformation calls upon governments to refrain from conducting and sponsoring disinformation campaigns and urges all stakeholders to take active steps to address the issue in a manner that respects human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and acknowledges in particular the specific targeting of and impact on women and people belonging to minority groups. The topic of disinformation couldn't be more timely, with elections happening across the world, with COVID-19 still such a huge presence in all of our lives. And it's an especially important topic to consider on World Press Freedom Day. In particular, with this panel, we want to explore not only the challenges and opportunities faced by FOC members in promoting human rights-based approaches to managing the growing threat of online disinformation, but also to address the FOC's call to action. What is being done? What's working and what isn't? And what should various stakeholders be doing next? To discuss this issue with us today, we're joined by a stellar panel. I'll note that we've had a few changes to our lineup. This includes that, unfortunately, Ms. Irene Khan, the UN Special Rapporteur on the freedom of opinion and expression, will not be able to join us today. But she sends her best regards and support for the work of the FOC and notes that her first report to the UN Human Rights Council will be about today's topic of disinformation online. So today we will hear from our other panelists who will share their thoughts about how disinformation and efforts to combat it can affect freedom of expression online. First, we'll hear from Mr. Guy Berger, the Director of Freedom of Expression and Media Development at UNESCO. Among other things, Mr. Berger leads UNESCO's work in developing indicators for UNESCO's concept of internet universality. He has underpinned much of UNESCO's work on disinformation, including the major study Balancing Act, Countering Digital Disinformation While Respecting Freedom of Expression. Our next panelist will be the Ambassador for Human Rights for the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, Mr. Rauno Merisaari. He is the Ambassador at Large on Human Rights and Democracy, and is a leading government expert on international human rights policy and for international democracy promotion. His mandate includes thematic issues such as freedom of expression off and online, ICT and human rights, and the rights of the Roma. Ambassador Merisaari also represents the government over the course of Finland's chairship of the Freedom Online Coalition in 2021. Next, we have Ms. Jean Guijoi, who's a program officer at Article 19 in West Africa. She is filling in for Mr. Alfred Bulakali, the Deputy Regional Director of Article 19 West Africa, who's listed in your program. At Article 19 West Africa, Ms. Guijoi coordinates all of the projects of the office, including those that concentrate on civic spaces, making sure that spaces are open, online and off, for civil society organizations and advocacy of human rights. She also focuses on reforms of government policies that are not aligned with international human rights standards. And finally, we have Ms. Alexandria Walden, who is the Global Policy Lead for Human Rights and Free Expression at Google. Ms. Walden leads Google's work on business and human rights to support responsible approaches to policies across all of Google's products. Her portfolio of issues includes human rights, freedom of expression, and controversial content, including hate and harassment. She also represents Google at the Global Network Initiative and the Freedom Online Coalition Advisory Network. So now to get us started with our discussion, we'll have some opening thoughts from each of our speakers. Mr. Berger, we'll turn to you first. If you could share with us, what makes disinformation and online free expression a timely topic, and why should the Freedom Online Coalition be engaging on it?
Well, thank you so much. Hello to everybody. I'm in Windhoek, Namibia. It's the 30th anniversary of the World Press Freedom Day, which was born here in Namibia, 1991. So UNESCO was involved at the birth, and I'm glad we're now in this middle age, start of middle age, because UNESCO works in the UN to advance freedom of expression. And UNESCO, of course, is an intergovernmental organization, and many of its members are members of the Freedom Online Coalition. Actually, from UNESCO, we've been developing the perspective that this whole topic is relevant, particularly to the Freedom Online Coalition, but actually to all states. And this is one reason why, in fact, we at UNESCO, the World Health Organization, and others, we are having these interagency discussions, because all these intergovernmental entities in the UN system are impacted by this, whether they're the Migration Organization, World Health Organization, UNESCO, and so on. So just to tell you very briefly at UNESCO, and then I'll say why I think it's timely to be looking at this statement, that if we were to treat the word disinformation as a chapeau concept for a form of expression that contains false and misleading content and has potentially serious harms, even irrespective of the intention of those transmitting it or even producing it. If we see this disinformation as this form of expression, then I think we can well recognize what the Freedom Online Coalition statement says. And it says that disinformation hinders freedom of opinion and expression, and it's used to intimidate and harass journalists and human rights defenders. So this is important because it's not just that disinformation exists in sort of peaceful coexistence with other kinds of expression. In fact, we do see increasingly how aggressive it is, because it's intrinsically antagonistic to truth and to truth tellers. At the same time, of course, we shouldn't forget that disinformation can also be seductive. It's simplistic, conspiratorial, emotive, it's polarizing. And the interesting thing is that the public, I think, are not yet savvy, even if they're tech savvy, they're not really aware of how disinformation works in relation to information. And they're not aware of how the internet companies are also conduits who are struggling with bad actors, and yet also have systems that are ranking and recommending this information. So it's very timely to raise awareness more about this problem, and to raise awareness that it can be dangerous. And finally, I'd say it's also timely because we are moving from a phase, although I don't think we're there out of it yet, but of trying to identify what is this and trying to understand it, towards moving to different responses. And some of these responses, of course, can damage freedom of expression, which I'm sure we'll speak about. And this was raised in depth in a UNESCO report we did for the UN's Broadband Commission. It's called the Balancing Act, if anybody would like to see it, because it's this whole question of, you've got a problem, and how do you fight it? And so one wouldn't want to fight fire with fire. You don't want to fight disinformation with disinformation. So what do you fight it with? And what are the risks of you actually damaging freedom of expression in this fight against this noxious form of expression? And at a time when we're also in a phase where we see lots of lapses in journalism, and we see lots of collapses in journalism because of the business model. So we in a perfect storm of issues around this particular problem in history, and so it's very timely to be revisiting and revisibilizing this Freedom Online Coalition statement. Back to you.
Thank you so much. And we will definitely come back to this question about the role of journalists and journalism in the global fight against disinformation. But now I'll turn to Ambassador Mehrsari, who will give us his thoughts, including, I hope, some more information about the role of the FOC in the creation of the statement within the Freedom Online Coalition.
Thank you, Emma, and good afternoon from Helsinki. We were honored to host the World Press Freedom Day conference 5 years ago here in Finland, and so very honored today to celebrate this 13th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration. The Helsinki conference adopted the Helsinki Finlandia Declaration to promote right of access to information, and we believe that we are still doing a good job to promote this right. And on behalf of the Freedom Online Coalition, I'd like also to congratulate the Unesco for their work for press freedom over 30 years. Yes, I'm happy to say some words about the Freedom Online Coalition work to combat disinformation. The launch of the FOC joint statement on spread of disinformation online this year, and the dissemination of this statement is a significant part of the Finland's chairship of the FOC this year. Let me also extend our warm thanks to the government of the UK for the leadership in drafting this process with us. The joint statement on disinformation comes at critical time. State-sponsored actors and authoritarian regimes have disseminated disinformation to create erosion of trust in public information and democratic institutions. Disinformation as such is not a crime or violate human rights obligations, but it can fracture community cohesion and polarize societies. It is a crime, at least in my country, and it violates human rights if it incites hatred. It can be also used many other ways to violate human rights or for discrimination. And authoritarian regimes may use disinformation as a pretext to restrict freedom of expression and other human rights. So we must be aware and be prepared to prevent disinformation, to protect people, democracy, and human rights. And the FOC approach is that the all efforts in preventing disinformation must be in compliance with international human rights law. We believe that both legal and political measures must be used. In my own country, a threshold to limit freedom of expression is very high. However, in international comparisons, Finland has ranked very high when we are measuring the resilience against disinformation. And my understanding is that the key word here is trust. The trust in democratic institutions and trust in public information. Right of access to public information and high quality inclusive education, which includes also digital and media literacy for all children, helps to keep this trust very high. Also, due to our geopolitical position, the public awareness of international propaganda has a long history. But I believe that the resilience against disinformation must be based on the trust in democratic institutions and access to information. Disinformation spreads cross-border, and we need international cooperation to deal with its harmful effects. And I believe that in the FOC's leadership in promoting human rights and democracy while preventing disinformation. The FOC may also, in cooperation with other organizations such as the Unesco, promote broader coalitions between states, business, media, and civil society in preventing disinformation. I think I'll stop here, and it's great honor to continue this discussion with the other panelists and you all. Thank you, Emma.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. Now I will turn over to Ms. Jean Guijoi from Article 19 West Africa, who will tell us a little bit about her perspective, including, I hope, kind of experiences that you've seen on the ground in your work with Article 19. You're still on mute. Sorry. And I was on mute when I tried to tell you that, so.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, I would just like to thank you all. I'm really grateful to be part of this panel. Yes, as you know, Article 19 is an international organization that works for freedom of expression, and our work is to make sure that those in front line have a space which allow them to do their work properly. So just to say that this topic is really timely, particularly in this context of COVID-19, and for Africa, a context where internet is really something new and that brings a lot of people around, people who are not trained how to use internet, how to use social media, and this is really an issue because governments take that opportunity to restrict expression, because people are now with internet have the opportunity to express themselves, have the opportunity to know what is going on, what was not possible before. So this is what we can see on the ground. And yes, it's true that the penetration of internet is still not high in Africa, but government are making efforts, and with the support of international, with the support of companies, private companies, to make sure that internet is widely accessible to people. And this, it has two issues. One which is good, which make people have access to information, but the other side is that people ask for more and need to know better what is going on their lives. And yes, this causes a big issue, and we've seen in our countries, in the region, West Africa region, that we monitor many arrests of journalists, state taking legislations to limit freedom of expression and to make people not really express themselves and ask for information. So this is what I can say for now, and I hope that I will be able to develop more on what we are doing and what we are seeing in the West Africa region. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And then for our final opening statement, I'll turn to Ms. Alexandria Walden from Google to tell us about the company's kind of approach to disinformation, and hopefully how you see the role of a company like Google in this global fight against disinformation.
Thanks, Emma. And thanks for inviting Google to participate in the conversation today. So I'll just, to start at the beginning, since our founding, Google has been committed to human rights, in particular free expression and access to information. Our products, with our products, we aim to give people choice and help, and to kind of help them find quality information and quality journalism more than ever before. And the core mission of the company is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So this topic is something that is close to home for us, and one that we have been working hard to put together an approach that is both committed to all of this and aligned with all of our standards and commitments around human rights, and really addresses the problems that we're seeing as they evolve across our services. We're seeing that, you know, as we work to prevent societal harm and the reach of low quality information, at the same time, there is this need, obviously, to produce high quality information. And so while we're struggling to kind of tackle this problem, what we've done is develop a four-pronged approach to the issue of disinformation. And really what these four pillars are complementary levers to support information quality and moderate content across our products and services. We call this the 4 R's because the 4 levers are raise, remove, reduce, and reward. And the reason why we think these are complementary are because it both allows us to address the most extreme parts of content that we see attached to real world harm, while also not limiting free expression and access to information in ways that are harmful to rights. And so just to give kind of a little bit more depth on each of the 4, when we talk about raise, we're talking about elevating high quality content and authoritative sources where it matters most. When we talk about remove, we're thinking about how we set responsible rules for each of our products and services and take action against content and behaviors that infringe on them. So we are both complying with legal obligations, also, where that's required. Reduce is another important aspect of how we approach disinformation, and that's really about how we approach and reduce the spread of potentially harmful information where we feature or recommend content. And then lastly, it's about reward. We set a high standard for quality and reliability for publishers and content creators who would like to monetize and advertise their content. This approach is important and relates to our commitments and leadership around transparency as well. We have, over the past few years, begun publishing what we call a tag bulletin, which gives some insight into when we do see things like foreign interference or coordinated attacks, et cetera. And so we are looking at ways we can be more transparent about qualitatively transparent about how we approach disinformation. I look forward to more conversation about this, but I just wanted to set out the baseline at this point.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to move into a moderated discussion, but I also want to invite all of the participants watching on the live stream. You are very welcome to submit your questions as well. So please do send those in, and we will be sure to turn to them a little bit later in the discussion. But yeah, to kick off our kind of more conversational format, so we've heard a lot about, it seems, agreement across all of the panelists about how important of an issue disinformation is, how necessary it is to take action, the need for coordination across governments, the need for governments to do things like agree not to be purveyors of disinformation themselves, and just a lot of kind of consensus about some of the challenges and opportunities. But I'd like to ask you each to reflect and just please feel free to jump in. What are some of the challenges to actually moving forward on this? Where do you see the real tensions or disagreements in actually making headway in the fight against disinformation?
I'm happy to jump in. Well, I think one of the challenges is that we have different understandings of what this thing is. First, people, I think, talk about disinformation and hate as if it's exactly the same thing or part of the same kind of combined problematic content, which it is quite often. But these are also distinctive. You know, you can have anti-vax, which is not the same as hateful. It's not inciting, you know, some kind of antagonism or hostility or discrimination. So we need to separate these a bit because also they have different status in international law. So, you know, in international law, certain hate speech, depending how you define it, but it is legitimately restricted. But as the ambassador said earlier, some falsehoods are not, you know, I mean, they protected speech. If you wanted to stop them, you would have to justify them in terms of issues like violating a person's right to dignity. So, you know, if we start mixing hate and we start mixing, you know, falsehoods together, we also can end up mixing remedies together in terms of international law, which impacts on freedom of expression. And then I think also we have a problem that there's a very popular understanding, which has some value, which is that, you know, disinformation is deliberate and that misinformation is unaware and not intending to cause harm. And I think it's more complex than that because both those concepts relate to the question of intent, and it's not always possible to know intent, and sometimes people can have good intentions, or so they may think, which have bad effects. And so we also have to look at other areas as well. And so some of the internet companies, for example, they're looking at disinformation more in terms of process and when there's coordinated inauthentic behavior. And of course, that in itself isn't a definition of disinformation, but it is a signal quite often. And then there's others who look at the actual impact, such as, you know, what is the impact on vaccination rates? And so, you know, we need to have an understanding, I think, that really doesn't limit these issues to the question of intention, but we also look at transmission and we also look at impact, and that we have to have that holistic, and until we have that holistic effect, I think it's difficult to really reach agreement. And then the last thing I would just say is that one of the traps of this situation is that it leads us into somehow thinking that all content is either information, or which is, you know, kind of true in one way or another, or disinformation, which, you know, in the broad sense, which is not true. And actually, you know, there's a lot more in the field of meaning than those two. So if you take things like science and the development of science, there's a lot of unknowns. You know, people don't know if it's true or if it's false at this point. But when you just have a binary, then you shoehorn it into one side or the other, and then you can end up, you know, justifying the suppression of scientific debate. And the same with policy debate, because policy debate is also not per se true or false. It's also related to values, opinions, and unknowns, because you don't know how policy is going to turn out. So, you know, I think that we need to really sophisticate this understanding of what is disinformation if we want to find more agreement on what to do about it, because how we define it impacts on the kinds of responses that we then you know, begin to work on. And if you define it, for example, only at the level of intention, well, you have the problem of identifying intention, but then you have the problem of how do you police intention and how do you enforce intention and all that stuff. That's pretty complex. If you define it only in terms of the bad effect on society, then you have to then you start saying, well, let's have educational strategies, and then you put the burden on the victims, as it were, to protect themselves. And if you put the emphasis on this transmission, you know, which it wouldn't be possible without internet companies transmitting it, you know, whether it was in search results or recommendations on Facebook groups, whatever, or on WhatsApp. If it wasn't for this, I mean, we wouldn't have such a big problem. But if you put the emphasis only on transmission, then you're going to lead to certain kinds of responses as well. So to agree on what responses we need to also have, as I said, this more complex understanding. That's my contribution.
Well, thank you. And I think the kind of what we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic over the past more than a year is a perfect illustration of that that idea that there's not, it's hard to draw a black and white line on truth or falsity on something like emerging global understanding of the characteristics of a novel virus. It's always been easy to say, don't drink bleach, for example. That is not going to be a cure for anything. But a lot of the kind of details about treatments or best practices for keeping people safe have actually shifted and changed as we've learned more about the virus over the past year. Ambassador Mersari, to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty much echoing what the Guijoi just mentioned. I think that we should look at this issue at three levels. The first one is about the definition. So, and some of my question is that, what is the antonym of disinformation? Is it truth? Is it factual information? Is it fact-based information? Is it checked information? We had a quite long discussion while preparing the FOC statement, and maybe there are a little bit different cultural traditions in various countries as well. So we basically know what we mean, but if trying to really to somewhere incorporate these things to national legislation, for instance, we shall be somewhere very strict there. The second level is about the freedom of expression. I mean that it's, at least in my country and our legal tradition, it is not so easy to somewhere to say that what is how far you can go with creating and disseminating the false information and not breaking a law. In our case, they are mostly the courts that are some way trying to define these things currently. And the third level is about the responsibilities and obligations. For instance, the European Union is just preparing and discussing the Digital Service Act, and somewhere trying to define that who is responsible of and of what. So how much, for instance, the social media platforms and enterprises, how much they are responsible for the false, harmful information. And I think this is still a little bit unsolved problem so far. Thank you.
Yes. I guess first to Jean and then to Alex.
Yes, I totally agree with what Mr. Berger said and the ambassador on the issues related to the definition of disinformation. What I would like to add here is that for us in Article 19, what we believe is that disinformation should be really seen or treated in a holistic way. Because as one of the intervenants just said, it is difficult to really give a definition to what disinformation is. And in this perspective, it's also difficult to give response to the fight against disinformation. I'll just take an example. We are discussing on this issue. The response that we have at the international level are different from what we can have in local and regional region. For example, in Africa, the way the disinformation is understood is different from how it's understood abroad, if I can say it like that. And the way the governments respond to disinformation is not the same. In Europe, for example, people, it's true, even there, we are seeing that civic space has been restricted, but here, from the beginning, that is the policies themselves, that are taken by the government, are not even given the opportunity to see what disinformation is. You are not even allowed to speak, that you are already spreading false information, spreading hate speech, as he said. You are confusing all those, how they call them, all those expressions. And this confusion also bring confusion on how the government respond to this situation. So I think having really a broad, holistic way of addressing disinformation is useful and necessary to try to see how all actors that are involved can really bring a response that convene or can be good for all actors, for all citizens, wherever they are. So this is what I can add.
And then to Alex, thank you.
Thanks. I think it's so positive when it's one of those panels where we all are actually in so much agreement about the ways we should be moving forward and where we all have concerns, because I would sort of align myself with the remarks of all of the rest of the panelists. What I wanted to add is from the company perspective, because of everything that everyone else has shared about the challenges of defining the problem and making sure that we are not infringing free expression and access to information in the course of trying to eliminate potential harms created by some slivers of content on our services. One of the things I think that's most important is to be sure that we are not trying to push a one-size-fits-all approach across the industry, because what we do know so far is that bad actors and or disinformation and misinformation circulate very differently across different platforms. Behavior and content move differently on different platforms. And so each platform needs to sort of have the ability to address the content the way that it's manifesting on its platform. And so where there are approaches that seek to create industry-wide, high-level industry-wide ability to compare, I think that's really important. But where there is kind of a push for a one-size-fits-all across platforms, I think it does a disservice to all of the ways in which companies are trying to respect rights while we tackle disinformation.
Thank you. Well, and that brings me to another set of questions, but just a reminder for our participants watching the stream, you're also welcome to ask your questions and get the panelists' insights on whatever's on your mind. But I'll ask a kind of another question to everyone, and maybe come to Jean, to Ms. Guijoi first. So we've talked a little bit about the role of platforms and kind of what they are doing or what they could be doing. And in your comments, you were also mentioning the particular challenges you're seeing in your work in West Africa about how many people are sort of new or relatively new to using the internet or just coming online. So I'm curious, are there things that you would like to see platforms in particular be doing to enable people to better understand the information that they're seeing? What sorts of things from your perspective would be most helpful to see from online services of different sorts?
Yes, thank you for this question. I think as an African, what we think is, first of all, for those who use internet platform, is really the trainings, is to be trained on how to use it. Because when internet came, since it's a virtual space, people just believe that they can do anything and that they are not seen, they are not known. So it came to a point where for people were thinking that they can really use the platform to contradict the government, the government not being able to see them or to catch them. So I think, as I said, the first thing is really train the users, is also for the platform to make sure that they give citizens the opportunity to express themselves. Because what we have seen is that, yes, we have two categories of actors that use the platform. You have those who are not really informed because they have internet, so they just go in on those platforms. But you also have the civil society actors, you have the human rights defenders, you have the bloggers that use those platforms. And sometimes they use those platforms to really bring to make people aware of what is going on. And what we usually see on platforms like Google WhatsApp, for example, or Facebook, some contents are removed and no explanation is given, just in the name of the fight against disinformation. And this is kind of thing that us as civil society defenders, we don't understand. And I was on a panel, I think 2 months ago, with the board of Facebook, and we were asking them to explain to us how they decide to remove content. And for us, it's an issue because there is a lack of transparency around those platforms. And we think that those platforms should make sure to be more transparent, give information on how those the content are moderated, and before and give opportunity to the users to be sure that what they are sharing is that their freedom of expression is not restricted simply because they don't know the policies, clear policies, and that are used. There's also one thing that came on one activity that we conducted, is that people were saying that Facebook, for example, have relationships with the government where they use the platform to track civil society actors and activists, because they collaborate, they have some collaboration, they share information, and the users are not aware of that. So it is important for me that platform really work on transparency. For me, it's transparency on also training the users on the risk that internet can pose, because internet is really a platform, yes, that gives people the opportunity to express themselves, but also it's a platform that brings risks on those who use them. Thank you.
No, that makes so much sense. The internet is a really powerful tool, and like any kind of powerful tool, you need to take safety precautions when you use it. Otherwise, things can go very badly indeed. I'd like to open it up also to the other panelists to share your reflections on both, whether it's what platforms are doing or governments, kind of what interventions are you seeing right now that seem to work, and what things where do you see kind of significant room for improvement? Yes, Ambassador.
Thank you. So, as said before, the legal way, that's not maybe the easiest way to somewhere to achieve some success very soon. I believe that we are going to, in the long run, we are going to have more also legislation what comes to the legal responsibilities of the internet service providers, and especially what comes to the transparency issues, that we should know that how the business is working to prevent disinformation. However, for instance, in our case in Finland, we have been mostly trying to promote cooperation between the authorities and the business. For instance, before our elections, all parliamentarian parties, so all means both parties in the government and opposition parties, have been able to cooperate with the certain social media enterprises and look how we can prevent the disinformation and the different kind of targeting, hate speech, hate rhetorics as a part of the election campaigns. And this has worked quite well. One remark more, and that is about the, I mean, some kind of proportionality of the efforts. I think that there's a recent report that the less than 1% of the information flows in social media is kind of that kind of intentional disinformation. So whatever we are doing, we must also consider the rights of people of access to information and freedom of expression. So we can't do or restrict more than it's necessary to deal with disinformation. Thank you.
Well, I'd also if other panelists would like to address that question, please do. But because it is World Press Freedom Day, because that is the conference that we're virtually all here together celebrating, I would also really like to hear from everyone your thoughts on kind of the role of journalists in disinformation. Obviously, not only in kind of being key sources of trusted information, but also maybe some of how you've seen issues around disinformation, either disinformation campaigns themselves or efforts to restrict disinformation being targeted at journalists, and kind of the role that you see journalists playing in helping us with this difficult problem. Mr. Berger, to you.
Thank you. Well, I come back to the phrase that I used in the beginning, that we're seeing lapses and we're seeing collapses. And the lapses are where we see media actually being part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So that's very difficult, and that really needs to be called out. And where that's happening hand in hand with state actors, that's particularly an issue. And so I think the Freedom Online Coalition has a role to play there. But of course, for journalists to do what they set themselves up to do, which is professional journalism, verification of information and informed opinion and analysis, then I think that the Freedom Online Coalition and others have got a lot to recognize in terms of the value of journalism. Because journalism is so key for surfacing in public space and with expected standards the kind of information that's very distinct from disinformation. And it's key not just as an alternative, but it's key for debunking the disinformation. It's key for excavating into the cesspit to see where the stuff comes from. And it's also key for exposing when the company efforts are not working, because we do have a credibility gap at the moment that the companies are widely regarded as not doing enough, in fact, regarded as enjoying their overall profit levels with disinformational content on their services. And so, journalism is really key to keep on sort of holding the companies to account, to holding the governments to account, to holding other media to account. And we face this problem now of collapse because we've got the collapse of business models of journalism, because journalism, media enterprises, particularly those depending on advertising, just couldn't keep up with the data-driven attention economics of internet companies. And so you got this real crisis at the same time that disinformation continues to burgeon. You've got a shrinking of journalism. And so I think if this is one thing that really the FOC could do a lot more about, is to say, how can FOC support journalism? How can FOC support journalists against being attacked? And how can FOC find ways to give economic support to the media that don't capture and degut the very journalism that we need to have supported? And there are lots of different ways. People have just seen the Australian method. You could argue pros and cons, but it's one method, and there are other methods. But unless there is support for journalism at the business level, really we are going to face a rather dystopian future.
Other thoughts or comments from the panelists? I think I see a couple people coming off mute. Ms. Walden.
Thanks, Emma. Well, I just, I wanted to add that, of course, so for us, a thriving news industry is fundamental, obviously, for our society and for institutions, and then, of course, for platforms that host and exchange information. As I said, our approach that is the 4 Rs, some of the most important pieces once we get past the remove the worst of the worst that is illegal or violates our policies. And beyond that, when we're seeking to elevate authoritative sources, that really means that we are relying on authoritative sources being created and journalists and news organizations creating that content. And that's why we have created and created programs and invested in journalism and the news industry. Just because of time, and I can't go through all of it, folks should go to just Google how Google supports journalism, and it kind of walks through all of the ways in which we've invested millions of dollars in supporting how the news industry and its business model can thrive in the online space, and how we support newsrooms and journalists in doing trainings both around their security and how they should kind of see best practices for how they operate online. And so it's important for companies in our industry to invest in that relationship, because a thriving online space requires a healthy news ecosystem.
Okay. Ms. Guijoi.
Yes, I would like to add that in Africa, especially, we have seen that the role of journalists have been increased, and the reporting they are also doing have been being better because of the internet. They have the opportunity to learn. They have the opportunity to exchange with other journalists freely and cheaper, because having training in certain time was not that easy. And we've seen fact-checking organization coming in, supporting journalists to really provide information checked, information that are transparent, that are good for the citizens. And I think this is something that is important to raise in our context, because we know that journalists lack means, and sometimes most of them are politically aligned, which also is an issue for disinformation, because since they are not really well supported by the media, they are sometimes utilized by political parties or political actors to provide information that are not really good. So I think the job they are doing currently is really important, and we've been seeing it during this COVID period that we are having. We've seen that the information that are shared in the platforms are really the information that are verified, that effort of verification is being done by the journalists, which is really appreciated. And I think as civil society actors, we should continue to support those journalists by giving them training, by encouraging them really use fact-checking to make sure that the information they are sharing are the good one, and that they should avoid this. What we've been seeing here is like, when information came, they're like a competition. Who is going to share it the first? Not making sure that the information is verified or not. And this is a really big issue. And as I mentioned, I think also really the financial support is really important for media and for journalists, for them to work in an open space with transparency, and where authorities do not interfere in their work, give the opportunity for pluralism in the media. And I think with that, journalists will continue doing their work and providing good information, and being playing their role of watchdog, and giving citizens the opportunity to make the choice which are based on good information.
Thank you. It's such an important reminder that as much as the internet can be very disruptive to journalistic business models, it also can provide this opportunity for such a greater diversity of voices and perspectives and people to participate in the craft of journalism. And we need that craft to be sustainable. So the business model questions don't go away, but that ability of access is just so enormous. We have just 5 minutes left in our session, so I'd like to ask each of our panelists to offer about 1 minute or 60 seconds of closing thoughts. And in particular, if you could share with us maybe one concrete thing that you would really like to see happen next in the fight against disinformation, whether it's by governments, platforms, journalists, researchers, civil society. What's one thing you want to see happen, as soon as possible in this field? And we'll just go through the order of our original speakers. So Mr. Berger, to you.
Sure. Well, we're dealing with a problem that is poisoning the well. So that's a big problem because it's a small amount of content, but with huge repercussions. And I think the way states can deal with this is to really look at the whole ecosystem and build a healthy online ecosystem. And to do that, to have an evidence base. And here I would give a commercial for the UNESCO Internet Universality Indicators. These are indicators to assess your national internet space, and then to make recommendations about how to improve it at the level of rights, the level of openness, the level of accessibility, and multi-stakeholder governance. We call them the ROAM principles and indicators. And what's interesting here is that these were developed over a long period of consultations with support by Google. Thank you, Alexandra. And by input by the Freedom Online Coalition in several occasions made representations, and that's why we have these indicators today, endorsed by the UNESCO member states. So this is a good tool, a good international tool, and I really think Freedom Online Coalition countries could make fantastic use of this to strengthen their overall online communications ecosystem with an evidence base based on the research using these indicators. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Mersari, to you.
Thank you. I must start by saying that my computer says that it will be restart in 53 seconds. I'm trying to fight for my rights, but I'm not sure if I will be somewhere dropped out here. Very shortly, thank you. The efforts would really like to continue this discussion with the UNESCO, other organizations, and the civil society and business. I believe that we shall continue this discussion so that we are looking at how we can combat disinformation. So not only that what are the harms, but to be a little bit more some way action oriented. That's what I'd like to say now. Still 11 seconds time before my computer is going to throw me out. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Ms. Guijoi, to you.
Yes, I would like to end my intervention by really calling our government to understand that internet is a great tool for them, and it is important for them to avoid adopting those legislation that really prevent people, citizens, civil society actors to communicate and to share information, because internet is a key for the development of our continent, but also to being competitive globally. They are seeing internet as a danger, and this is really regrettable. So my call is on our government to use internet, encourage the use of internet, and take measures that really encourage people to use internet and to get all the benefit that we can have on those platforms.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Walden.
Thanks. I would say, from the company perspective, companies having responsible approaches to addressing disinformation requires us to have our own policies in place to respect the law, to respect human rights, to ensure that we are increasing transparency, and to make sure that we're engaging with governments and all of our multi-stakeholder colleagues as we talk about what regulation looks like in this area. So, the problem of disinformation, though, is a whole of society problem, and it requires a whole of society approach. And so what I'd like to see is continued recognition that this is not a simple problem, that it's complicated and evolving, and recognition that we need to continue to collaborate across all stakeholder groups to take a nuanced approach to this.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your remarks. Thank you to the Freedom Online Coalition for organizing this session today. Thank you for the World Press Freedom Day Conference for having this wonderful day to explore these topics and celebrate the role of the press and the importance of press freedom in all of our lives. And most importantly, thank you to you watching on the stream. We hope you took something away from this. I know I certainly did. And while I think have described a lot of really big challenges in the fight against disinformation, I'm also glad to hear just how many ideas there are about really concrete things we can do to battle it. So hopefully at the next World Press Freedom Day, we'll have good news to update everyone on the state of global disinformation. With that, thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.